this unit, you are going to learn about the comparative and superlative forms of adjectives and adverbs, and about other ways of talking about similarities and differences. There are two ways to form comparative and superlative adjectives. One way is to use more before adjectives for the comparative and the most before adjectives for the superlative. This is what is done with all adjectives of 3 syllables or more, and with most 2-syllable adjectives. It is not done with 2-syllable adjectives that end in Y and with 1-syllable adjectives. With 2-syllable adjectives that end in OW, LE and ER, we have a choice. But usually we form the comparatives and superlatives of these adjectives with more and the most. Here are examples of long adjectives of 3 or more syllables. Expensive, more expensive, the most expensive. Reliable, more reliable, the most reliable. Comfortable, more comfortable, the most comfortable. Difficult, more difficult, the most difficult. Here are examples of 2-syllable adjectives with which we must use more and the most. Boring, more boring, the most boring. Useful, more useful, the most useful. Instead, with 1-syllable adjectives, we do not use more and the most. We add the ending ER to form the comparative and the ending EST to form the superlative. Old, older, the oldest. Young, younger, the youngest. Hard, harder, the hardest. We also use the endings ER and EST with 2-syllable adjectives which end in Y. Happy, happier, the happiest. Easy, easier, the easiest. For 1-syllable adjectives and for 2-syllable adjectives that end in Y, it is a mistake to use more and the most. More old, the most old, more easy, the most easy are mistakes. There are also cases when you can choose between more, the most, and the ER, EST endings. With 2-syllable adjectives that end in OW, ER and LE, we can use either the ER and EST endings or more, the most. Both are correct. Narrow, narrower, the narrowest. Gentle, gentler, the gentlest. Clever, cleverer, the cleverest. Or narrow, more narrow, the most narrow. Gentle, more gentle, the most gentle. Clever, more clever, the most clever. With the following adjectives, we can also choose either the ER, EST endings or more, the most. Handsome, quiet, pleasant, stupid, tired. Now we are going to look at the rules for spelling changes in the comparative and superlative forms of regular adjectives. Of course, these rules only apply to those adjectives that form comparatives and superlatives with ER and EST. When adjectives end in E, add R or ST. Fine, finer, finest. Gentle, gentler, gentlest. Free, freer, freest. When adjectives end in y preceded by a consonant, change the y to I before adding er or est. Happy, happier, happiest. Dry, drier, driest. When adjectives end in a single vowel, followed by a single consonant, double the final consonant before adding er or est. Thin, thinner, thinnest. Y is not changed to I when it is preceded by a vowel. Grey, greyer, greyest. The final consonant is not doubled after a consonant preceded by a double vowel. Cheap, cheaper, cheapest. Here are the adjectives with irregular comparatives and superlatives. Good, better, best. Bad, worse, worst. Far, farther, farthest. Far, further, furthest. You've noticed, of course, that far can have different comparative and superlative forms. Which you use depends on how we are using the word. In British English, when we mean that something is more distant, we can use either farther, farthest, or further, furthest. Which is farther from London, Dublin or Inverness? Which is further from London, Dublin or Inverness? What's the farthest you've ever been from home? What's the furthest you've ever been from home? In American English, only farther, farthest are used when comparing distances. Further has an additional meaning. It can be used to mean additional, more advanced, extra. Please feel free to write if you would like further information. Farther cannot be used with this meaning. It can only be used to compare distances. When we use little as an adjective meaning not big, we generally use smaller and the smallest, rather than littler and the littlest, in the comparative and superlative. Instead, when we use little as a determiner to mean a small quantity of something or possessing a quality to a small degree, the comparative is less and the superlative is the least. Imaginative, less imaginative, the least imaginative. Little money, less money, the least money. Note that while less and the least can be used with uncountable nouns, money for example, they should not be used with countable nouns. With countable nouns we use few, the fewest, few cars, fewer cars, the fewest cars. The adjective old has both regular forms, older, oldest, and the irregular comparative and superlative forms, elder and eldest, used to describe greater age within a group, usually a family. She's the eldest sister in a family of 5. The comparative and superlative of nearly all adverbs are formed by placing more and the most before the adverb. Cleverly, more cleverly, the most cleverly. Beautifully, more beautifully, the most beautifully. There are also a few adverbs for which we use the endings er and est. These include fast, soon, early, late, hard, long, near. All of these, except soon, are adverbs, which are the same as the adjectives they correspond to. Very often, people think that the adverb for hard is hardly, but it isn't. Remember that the adverb hard is the same as the adjective hard. The word hardly exists, but its meaning is quite different. It means very little, almost not at all. To say someone works a great deal, we say he works hard. To say someone works very little, we say he hardly works. There are also a few adverbs with irregular comparative and superlative forms. These are well, better, the best, badly, worse, the worst, little, less, the least, much, more, the most. When do we use the comparative? We use the comparative when we are describing how something or someone differs from something it is distinct from. The comparative is always followed by than. This is true for adjectives. You're a better driver than I am. John's brother is taller than he is. And it is also true for adverbs. You speak English better than I do. I work more quickly than you do. Note the pronunciation of than, which is normally unstressed. Than. London is bigger than Paris is not correct. London is bigger than Paris is correct. In the sentences we looked at a moment ago, than is followed by a subject pronoun and a verb. When the verb is omitted, we generally use an object pronoun. Me, you, him, her, it, us, them, after than. John's brother is taller than him. You speak English better than me. In formal English, than is followed by a subject pronoun. I, you, he, she, it, we, they. She is younger than I. I am older than she. This is correct, but sounds strange to most people. So you should avoid using a subject pronoun on its own after than. You can do this by adding a verb after the subject pronoun. These sentences sound much better than the ones we've just looked at. She is younger than I am. I am older than she is. We've been looking at sentences with pronouns. When instead than is followed by a noun, you can choose whether or not to use the verb again after than. Both of the following sentences are acceptable. London is bigger than Paris is. London is bigger than Paris. When the verb is different, it must of course be used. I can dance better than I can sing. London is bigger than it used to be. The weather is better than it was yesterday. When instead do we use the superlative? We use the superlative when we compare someone or something with the rest of a group it is part of. This is true for adjectives. She's the most helpful person I know. John's brother is the tallest boy in his class. And for adverbs. This machine works the most efficiently of all those at the trade fair. Of course, we can also use superlatives with the least. She's the least imaginative person I know. When you use superlatives, you must remember to use the. The Rolls-Royce is most expensive car in the world is a mistake. The only time that the can be omitted is with a possessive adjective. My, your, his, her, its, our, their, or a noun in the possessive case. She's the best friend Mary has. She's Mary's best friend. It was the most frightening experience in my life. It was my most frightening experience. She's the youngest girl in his family. She's his youngest sister. Remember too that with superlatives we normally use the preposition in, not of. Queen Elizabeth is the richest woman in the world. It's the fastest car in the world. He's the most highly paid athlete in England. Other prepositions are possible. It's the most up-to-date computer on the market. She's the nicest person under the sun. It's the best machine at the trade fair. Of is only possible after a superlative when the superlative adjective is not followed by a noun. It's the best of the machines we saw at the trade fair. We use of when the superlative is followed by the word all. She's the nicest of all the people I know. Superlative adjectives can also be used without nouns. This is the best. It's the greatest. You may have learned at school that comparatives are used when the comparison is between two people or objects, and that superlatives are used when three or more people or objects are involved. That's what I learnt too, but it's not really true. The important distinction is whether or not what is being compared is separate from what it is being compared to. When someone or something is distinct from what it is being compared to, it doesn't matter that more than two of a thing are being considered. We use a comparative. Jim has 4 brothers. He is taller than the other 4 boys. It is when what is being compared belongs to the group it is being compared to that we use a superlative. Jim is the tallest in his family. In both of the examples which follow, a group of 2 is being considered. When in the line from Kipling's poem, one person is distinct from the other, a comparative is used. You're a better man than I am, Gunga Din. Instead, when the 2 people are considered as belonging to the same group, the superlative is used. So at the beginning of a boxing match, the referee says, "May the best man win." To indicate to what extent 2 things are different, we can place a quantifier before a basic comparative. Here are some quantifiers. No, a little, slightly, a bit, far, much, a lot. They can be used together with a comparative adjective or adverb. No happier, a little faster, a bit colder, a lot bigger, far bigger, much more interesting. Using quantifiers with short adjectives that form the comparative with the ER ending is usually not a problem. However, sometimes when people use a comparative adjective with much, they forget to use more. Much interesting is a mistake. Remember that much and all the other expressions you've just seen need to be followed by a complete comparative. I thought the second speaker was much more interesting than the first. The restaurant was a bit more expensive than we expected. To indicate that things or people are equal in some way, we can use the structure as, modifier as. We can use this structure with adjectives. He's as poor as a church mouse. And with adverbs, Mary sings as well as Jane does. With nouns and verbs, we use as much, as and as many, as. With uncountable nouns, we use as much as. I have as much money as I need. We also use as much as with verbs. Take as much as you like. With countable nouns, we use as many as. We've got as many stamps as we need. To indicate difference, we use the structure not as with adjectives and adverbs. John's not as tall as Jim. I don't drive as fast as you do. Not as much as is used with verbs and uncountable nouns. Not as many as with countable nouns. I don't walk as much as I should. I don't have as much time as I would like. There weren't as many people as we expected. In the negative, especially in British English, we can also say not so as. London is not so foggy now as it was in the past. But the use of not so modifier as isn't as common as it once was. Now that you know how to use the structure not as, it is important that you do use it. In fact, especially with short adjectives and adverbs, it is used far more than comparatives with less. I doubt you will ever hear someone who knows English well say, John is less tall than Jim. New York is less cold than Montreal. What you will hear is, John isn't as tall as Jim. New York isn't as cold as Montreal. We also use not as much as with nouns. I don't drink as much coffee as you do. With longer modifiers, both structures can be used. A Ford is less expensive than a Rolls-Royce. A Ford isn't as expensive as a Rolls-Royce. That is the end of the lesson. Now you can do the exercises on the grammar points presented in this unit.